August 17th, 1969, 0340 hours. A humid mist rolled across the valleys north of the demilitarised zone, thick enough to swallow headlights and distort distance. 11 men from Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, had crossed the perimeter wire 6 hours earlier, assigned to investigate a cluster of lights seen flickering near an unmarked hamlet on the tactical maps. The area was considered empty, no civilian movement, no enemy positions. It had been burned out months earlier during artillery sweeps. Yet through night vision lenses, something had glowed there again. The patrol advanced in staggered formation along a narrow paddy embankment. Their boots sank into soft mud, the air reeking of stagnant water and smoke residue. To the east, artillery fire echoed faintly, far enough to sound harmless, close enough to remind them they were not safe. Sergeant Miller led from the front, scanning for tripwires, watching the green glow of the compass needle shake in his trembling hand. The radio operator trailed behind, whispering status updates every 30 minutes. Routine. Until 0420 hours, when all transmissions began to distort, a low hum rising through the static like a deep mechanical breath. By dawn, the fog thickened. The village appeared without warning, a cluster of dark shapes materialising from the white. Roofs half collapsed, doors hanging open, cooking pots overturned in the dirt. No birds, no insects, only wind pressing through the bamboo fences. The team spread out cautiously, marking the perimeter. Their boots disturbed dust that should not have been dry after the rain. Everything smelled old, untouched, yet fresh footprints crossed the ground, small, bare and recent. At 0458 hours, the radio cut again. The last message recorded at base was a short burst. Movement inside followed by a shriek of feedback that lasted 3 full seconds before silence. Attempts to raise the patrol failed through the morning. Air reconnaissance found nothing. No heat signatures, no smoke columns, not even the faint outline of a campfire. It was as if the village and the men inside it had folded into the fog and vanished. At noon, 2 scout teams were dispatched to the coordinates. They reached the site by nightfall. The landscape matched the photographs taken months earlier. Flat, overgrown, no structures standing. The hamlet wasn't there. Just grass and a few charred posts sticking out of the earth like gravestones. The coordinates lined up perfectly, but nothing else did. The search continued for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, 3 men stumbled out of the jungle near an old French road, dehydrated and burned. Their weapons were missing. They couldn't explain where they had been. Their stories conflicted in small ways, but shared one unbearable detail. The village hadn't been empty after all. They spoke of hearing children singing in a language none could recognise, of doorways that changed places, of radio voices calling from beneath the ground. Military records list the incident as patrol misorientation and environmental fatigue. No further missions were assigned to that grid. Weeks later, a new map was printed for the sector. The coordinates once marked Hamlet 12 had been replaced by a blank space. Something had been erased, not just from the charts, from memory itself. August 16th, 1969, 2,230 hours. The night before the patrol vanished. The air near the DMZ was heavy, dense with the metallic taste of rain that never came. The platoon moved under blackout conditions, guided only by the dim phosphor glow of their compasses. The terrain dipped into a shallow basin, a dead zone between ridges that intelligence maps marked as inactive. No heat traces, no enemy movement. The kind of quiet that makes veterans uneasy. By midnight, the mist thickened until shapes dissolved into moving shadows. The men slowed, their senses sharpening, every snapped twig a warning. Then came the first sign. A single lantern flickering deep in the valley. Not firelight. Too steady, too pale. The lieutenant raised his hand and the patrol froze, eyes drawn toward a faint outline of rooftops pressed against the fog. A village, one that shouldn't exist. They descended the slope in silence. The hamlet was arranged in a rough circle of huts, the ground littered with bones of livestock, rusted tools and half-buried clay jars. Doors stood open as if waiting. Inside the huts they found bowls filled with water that hadn't evaporated, blankets folded neatly, incense ash still warm in the corners. Everything suggested recent life, yet not a sound stirred the air. No dogs barked, no chickens fled, no human voices called out. When the radio man tried to report in, his headset filled with static. It pulsed in rhythm, a slow, uneven beat like a heartbeat underwater. He removed it, shaking his head. The frequency was clear seconds earlier. Miller ordered a perimeter sweep. Each man took a sector. They moved in widening circles, marking each house with chalk. It was mechanical work meant to calm nerves. But as they moved, the village seemed to shift. Paths curved differently than before. Landmarks blurred. They began finding houses they swore they had already searched. The same pots, the same open door, the same cracked mirror reflecting nothing. Corporal Ruiz, at the western edge, discovered the first anomaly. The ground dipped into a shallow pit lined with stones. In its centre stood a pole carved with unfamiliar symbols, wrapped in cords made of animal hair. Around it lay dozens of small wooden figures, faceless and worn smooth by handling. The moment Ruiz touched one, the radio static surged again, this time audible to everyone. It came from the earth itself, rising like a vibration through their boots. They regrouped, uneasy. The lieutenant suggested setting camp until sunrise, but no one wanted to sleep there. The air had changed, colder now, dense with the smell of wet iron. Somewhere beyond the tree line something moved. Not footsteps, not animals. More like the slow dragging of something heavy against the ground. The fog seemed to draw closer, folding around the village like a living thing. At 0340 hours, Miller made the last transmission, a half sentence swallowed by noise. Minutes later, the radio died completely. The static ended not with a fade, but a sharp click, as though someone had unplugged the world. By dawn, nothing remained of their signal. Back to August 17th, 1969. 0450 hours. Dawn had not yet broken, but the mist had grown so thick it seemed to glow from within, a pale light with no source. The air held a strange pressure, like the weight before a storm. The patrol gathered in a loose circle near the centre of the hamlet, their faces drawn and grey, their boots sunk in damp ash. None had slept, none had spoken for nearly an hour. Every attempt to raise command failed. The radio was dead, its battery still full, its circuits unburned. Sergeant Miller gave orders in hand signals now, cautious not to draw attention. Attention from what? No one could say. The jungle beyond the village walls no longer sounded alive. Even the night insects had gone silent. Then faintly came the first noise, a whispering that drifted from somewhere beneath the huts. It wasn't language at first, more like the shuffling of air through narrow spaces, 1,000 tiny breaths. The men froze. One knelt, pressing his ear to the ground. The whisper rose and fell like waves, spreading through the soil. Private Henson, the youngest of the group, began marking positions on a notepad. When he looked up again, half the village seemed different. The huts on the north end had shifted, doorways turned inward. Paths that had led to the well now led nowhere. The fog pressed tighter, bending sound, warping distance. Ruiz swore he saw movement behind the huts. Small shapes darting through the white, moving too smoothly to be human. They left no footprints. At 0508 hours, the air temperature dropped sharply. Frost gathered on the barrels of their rifles. The breath of every man hung motionless, frozen mid-air for seconds at a time. Then came the singing, faint, high-pitched voices, rising and falling in a rhythm that made the fog vibrate. It came from the direction of the pit where Ruiz had found the carved figures. The sound was hypnotic, drawing them forward even as instinct screamed to retreat. When they reached the pit, it was no longer empty. The figures had been arranged into a circle, each facing outward. Between them burned a thin blue flame with no smoke, no heat. The singing grew louder but remained distant, as though echoing from beneath the earth. The lieutenant raised his hand to signal withdrawal. That was when the ground shifted. Not a tremor, but a pulse. The soil moved underfoot as if something massive breathed below it. The blue flame flickered and vanished. The fog thickened again, closing like a curtain. Miller tried the radio one last time. Only a low hum answered, then a voice. Faint, broken, but human. It spoke his own call sign, repeated twice, then a third time with a distorted echo, as if mocking. Every man heard it. None could explain it. They broke formation and ran toward the southern tree line, disoriented and blind. The fog did not thin. It followed. Shapes moved alongside them, silhouettes without features, walking at the same pace, whispering words no one could understand. The forest swallowed the patrol. One by one, the transmissions died. By morning, all that remained at the site were footprints circling endlessly in the mud, overlapping until they led nowhere. August 19th, 1969. 2 days after the patrol disappeared. The search teams had been sweeping the valley since dawn, fanning out along the border of the last known coordinates. The fog had lifted, leaving the ground slick and pale, as if the rain had washed the colour out of the world. Tracks appeared, then vanished. Radio signals bent off course. Nothing made sense, until mid-afternoon when a pair of medics spotted movement near a collapsed French road marker. 3 figures stumbled from the tree line, filthy, burned and barefoot. Their uniforms were torn nearly to ribbons, their tags rusted by sweat. The first collapsed before speaking. The second kept walking until he was forced down. The third just stared, eyes wide, unblinking, pupils so dilated they looked black. All 3 had blood under their nails and ash embedded in their skin. They were identified as Miller, Ruiz and Henson. The rest of the squad was never found. The survivors were evacuated to a temporary field station south of the river. Medical personnel noted dehydration, second-degree burns and signs of acute shock. Yet none showed external injuries consistent with combat. No shrapnel, no bullet wounds, just exhaustion and a strange pattern of bruising around their wrists and ankles, as if they had been restrained. The doctor's notes describe an odour clinging to their uniforms, metallic, sweet and faintly electrical. Interrogation began within hours. Miller's report was the most coherent. He claimed they'd retreated south after the fog closed in, navigating by compass and sound. But the terrain had changed. Paths led in circles. Their watches stopped. He remembered voices calling from the tree line, familiar voices, men from their own platoon who weren't there. Ruiz described hearing footsteps behind them, slow and deliberate, always matching their pace. When they turned, nothing. Only mist and the faint hum of the radio, though the battery had been removed hours earlier. Henson, the youngest, spoke least. When pressed, he said the village wasn't deserted, that something lived under it. He described openings in the soil that breathed, drawing in air like lungs. He said they heard chanting beneath their feet, and when they fired into the ground, the earth bled. His hands trembled violently as he spoke. When he finished, he vomited a black tar-like fluid that laboratory tests later dismissed as organic residue of unknown origin. The report was classified the same day. By the end of the week, all 3 men had been transferred to separate facilities. None were seen again. Official statements referred to psychological trauma induced by environmental stresses. No mention of the village, the fog, or the missing 8 men. Yet one radio technician reviewing the final transmission log noticed something unusual. A single burst of encrypted static lasting 3 seconds longer than recorded. Within that signal, under heavy magnification, was a faint rhythmic pulse, repeating at perfect intervals. The technician played it through a frequency translator. The result was unmistakable, a human voice whispering the same phrase over and over, barely audible through distortion. "We're still here." He filed it as a data glitch. The tape was sealed. The coordinates of the incident were erased. September 3rd, 1969. The investigation had officially closed. The paperwork listed the event as communication loss and probable environmental disorientation. But not everyone accepted that. A reconnaissance pilot named Tully, who had flown over the DMZ sector the night the patrol disappeared, filed an unofficial report. He claimed that on thermal imaging, he saw a perfect circle of cold, a zone roughly 200 metres wide, reading 10 degrees lower than its surroundings. At its centre, a single heat signature pulsed and then vanished. Command dismissed it as equipment error. Still, Tully marked the coordinates on his own map and kept them. Weeks later, he flew the same route again. The landscape looked identical, but the coordinates were gone. Literally. The terrain didn't match the chart. Where the river bend and ridgeline should have intersected, there was only featureless jungle. No clearing, no ruins, just trees growing in a perfect arc, as if something beneath had shaped them. He mentioned it once to a fellow pilot. Within days, both men were reassigned. Back at base, the tape of the final radio transmission was moved to restricted archives. The technician who had heard the hidden whisper later tried to retrieve it for verification. It wasn't there. The entire reel had been removed, the label stripped. The logbook showed a single red stamp beside the entry, void. No officer's initials, no retrieval order. By October, the story had dissolved into rumour. A ghost village, a patrol gone mad, strange lights near the border. Veterans avoided talking about it. Locals whispered that the hamlet had been cursed long before the war, built on the bones of a temple buried centuries ago. Some said it appeared and disappeared with the fog, visible only when the air was heavy enough to remember. Others claimed they still heard radios buzzing on windless nights, carrying half-finished sentences across the hills. In 1972, a South Korean engineering crew clearing mines in the same valley found something. Buried less than a metre below the surface was a section of rusted barbed wire, twisted around a US issue helmet. Inside the helmet, fused into the metal, were fragments of human bone. Beneath that lay the remains of wooden carvings, small figures arranged in a circle, their faces rubbed smooth. The soil analysis revealed trace radiation far above background levels. The site was sealed immediately. Today, no map lists the coordinates. The grid reference is missing even from declassified archives. Satellite scans show only vegetation. Yet every few years, patrol drones record brief electromagnetic interference in the same sector, always circular, always faint, always just before dawn. The military calls it a signal echo, a harmless anomaly. But among those who've studied the reports, there's an unofficial name for it now, the echo field. They say if you listen closely to the static long enough, you'll still hear them, the last breaths of men walking through fog, calling from a village that no longer exists, a place erased from the map but not from memory. And sometimes when the mist rolls in over the valley, locals swear they see a single blue flame flicker above the tree line, just before the silence returns. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below. I always read what you think. Hit like if you learned something new, and subscribe so you don't miss the next untold story of war, courage and survival. Turn on the bell for more history brought to life. See you in the next one.